Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 5, Episode 1, Dream a Little Dream of Me. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So, usually we start with the patients, but there were some things that happened to the hospital as a whole in general on this episode. So the first was that as a teaching hospital, they used to be number 2, and now this year's results came out and they've dropped all the way down to 12th, so by 10 spaces, which puts everybody on edge in the hospital, leading to some questionable decisions. They also were downgraded from a level 1 trauma center, which would be the first to get any emergent cases, to a level 2, meaning now that they are second, so only if the level 1 trauma centers have more overflow than what they can handle will they then get the traumas. This then again leads to some questionable decisions, and ultimately at the end of the episode Richard does give a speech about how their protocols now are going to have to change because they've become stagnant and complacent, and as a result of that lost their standing. The patients in this episode were mostly all related. The only one not related was Christina. Christina, at the end of the first of the 2 episodes, because this is a double length episode, ends up stabbed with an icicle. But all of the other patients are basically 2 limos end up crashing on the way to a ball, a fire and ice ball that they were heading to. The wives were in one vehicle, the husbands in another. And there was some drama around this. So there was 3 husbands, Vincent, Philip, and Michael. Michael was cheating with Philip's wife and on his wife with Philip's wife. Philip almost was paralyzed, but one of the decisions that were made when they realized that their standing had fallen was to try an experimental procedure for the first time, which Callie took point on, and she does during the surgery have a moment where she panics, doesn't know what to do, and almost loses the patient. But in the end, she does manage to pull herself back, and he does end up with a successful surgery, allowing him to walk again because he would have otherwise been paralyzed. Vincent ends up passing away as he had a skull fracture that unfortunately wasn't able to be healed. And then Michael, he ends up otherwise fine, but his vocal cords are now ruined, so he'll not speak again. And his wife finds out about the affair. Not only that, but he'd been hiding from his wife the fact that he lost his job and his insurance was going to be expiring, which led to another questionable decision that was made by Bailey to fudge the time of the surgery so that it looked like it took place before midnight when his insurance expired, which is fraud. So, like I said, questionable decisions. On the wife's side, the limo driver dies pretty much immediately upon entering the hospital because he was thrown through his windshield. The wives are Sarah Beth, Betty, and I'm blanking, and Anna. So Anna is the one who was cheating. So Sarah Beth was married to Michael. He didn't tell her about what was happening. Anna was her best friend from childhood, like 50 years best friends, and cheated on her husband with Michael, which Sarah Beth finds out about. Betty is the most tragic because Vincent was her husband. He's the one who died, and her memory resets every 30 seconds now. So she basically keeps coming to wondering what's happening and keeps having to be informed over and over again. She was in an accident, your husband's dead, until they decide to start lying to her in order to let her know Vincent's coming because they know her memory is going to keep resetting every 30 minutes. And then Sarah Beth seems to be coming around to forgiving Anna and Michael after he writes her really nice letter after he has a surgery. Anna and Philip seem to be doing okay. He doesn't know that she cheated, though, within this episode. I don't think they tell him, but, he's the one who almost couldn't walk. Now he can walk because of the experimental procedure. So they ultimately come out the best out of everybody. Um, but that's basically what happened there. And Owen Hunt, who is going to become a multi-season main character and be with Christina, does come into the hospital after triaging them because his car was behind the husband's limo. He's offered a job by Richard, but says he's going back on another tour of duty, so at this point he declines it. Um, Christina, who was stabbed by the icicle, was supposed to help him with a thigh wound, but he kind of just triaged himself and stapled it. Then he helps her with the icicle, and he does kiss her before the end of the episode after they semi-flirt throughout the episode. Drama news. Izzy and Alex were getting along. Meredith made a joke. Alex thought Meredith was thinking he was weak and that Izzy told him he was weak, and so he kind of lashes out at her, and their relationship ends up back on the rocks. And at the end of the episode, Alex is with some unknown woman we only see from the back, and Izzy goes into a delusion about seeing Denny. Then Meredith asks Derek to move in after going back and forth about it with Christina. Then she balks because she's not sure she actually wants to move in because it might not work because this whole infidelity scandal, like 40 years of marriage and they're still unfaithful after 40 years. Can she really fully trust anybody anytime ever? But then ultimately does choose to trust in Derek by the end of the episode, and so they are seen packing to move in. Christina and Meredith reaffirm that they are each other's person about this whole thing because before she was hit with the icicle, Christina had kind of lashed out at Meredith because she was annoyed about hearing it. Han was told in the last episode of season 4 that she was a bad teacher. This episode, she looks at everybody else's teaching styles before ultimately making her point that she does teach well. And one of the things with regards to Christina is that Christina has so many cardio hours that her knowledge in other fields and other areas is lacking, and that is shown in this episode when, um, while doing the surgery on Vincent, Christina does a stitch she's done 100 times, but she's only ever done it on a heart, not on the bowels, and she ends up not doing it correctly on the bowels, which had to be treated differently, proving this point that she's focused too much on cardio because that's where her passion is, but she's therefore losing or not gaining the skills she needs in other areas, which is also pointed out by Richard in his speech at the end of the episode. Rose kind of goes what Sloane calls delayed rage. She was broken up with somewhere within the episode, like between end of season 4, beginning of season 5, and she ends up stabbing Derek with a scalpel by passing it to him the wrong way, which is a mistake she normally would never have made, so she decides to switch to peds. This is the last episode she is in. Hallie and Han at the end of the last episode of season 4 were making out. This episode starts off with them being incredibly awkward to each other, and then they do have a conversation about how Kelly doesn't think she's into girls, but thinks she might be into Erica. So they're still kind of awkward, but not so negative by the end of the episode. Um, Lexi thinks she has a crush on George, finds out George slept with Meredith, but ultimately decides not to tell him because he basically tells her that they're friends, more than roommates, friends, not showing any particular interest in her. And her and Sloane kind of have a thing going this episode about him trying to pressure her to tell George that she likes him, which she ultimately, again, ends up deciding not to do. I think that about covers all the main drama. There might have been smaller dramas that I missed, but overall, I think that covers everything that was a main drama in this double episode. Which brings us to the rankings, mostly objective ranking list first, followed by the personal ranking list. And we have our single episode supporting character introductions. Again, we have Betty, Philip, Michael, Sarah Beth, Anna, and Vincent. Limo driver doesn't really get a name. I don't even know if it's mentioned, but he's the first to die very briefly at the beginning. Multi-episode supporting character development. Rose switches to peds and is off of the show now. Multi-season main character is introduced with Owen Hunt. Multi-season main character development, Christina is stabbed by an icicle, but it does miss anything that's important. Main relationship development, Meredith asks Derek to move in, and Owen kisses Christina. That is a main relationship because of the future developments that happen. As this is a rewatch, I will spoil it now. They do end up married at some point. So, a main relationship. And they do stay married, I think, until, like, they do stay together until Christina leaves the show. So, that's why it's a main relationship for her. And that's all of our positive points, bringing us to our negative points. Negative messaging or behavior. Experimenting with unfamiliar procedures is what Callie does. It does have a good outcome in this case, but she could potentially have harmed the patient. And while everybody has to do something for the first time, her research was not as thorough as it needed to be. So as soon as they hit a complication, it ended up causing panic and her to almost lose the patient until she was talked down by somebody else who made her, walk through what research she did have, which allowed them to successfully complete it, but it could have ended really wrong. So that's negative. Obviously, there was infidelity between the limo goers, and that always is a big trigger for me. Hate, like zero tolerance, in my opinion. Infidelity is completely unnecessary in life, and I don't think that anybody who engages in it is a good person just fundamentally, because why would you do that to somebody that you claim to love? I don't think that you can and still claim you love somebody. So obviously took 2 points for that. And then the insurance fraud, obviously Bailey fudges the times, and on like a person level, it's like that was a nice thing to do because the surgery would otherwise bankrupt this man who lost his job, who's potentially losing his wife because he cheated on her with her best friend. Um, and he needed some tests, which caused the surgery to be delayed past the insurance time. So as a person, she is doing a nice thing, like saving him money. But from an ethical standpoint, as a surgeon and towards like the insurance companies, which have their rules in place for a reason to protect their business, it is insurance fraud. It is probably illegal because it is also fudging, the surgical data and the hospital records and all of that. So I did take 2 points. And then supporting relationship regression or breakup. Obviously, Derek broke up with Rose off screen between the last episode and this one. And she has that whole delayed rage thing, which ultimately results in her stabbing him with a scalpel. And then we have Erica and Callie and their awkward encounters. And while it does get better by the end of the episode, with Callie admitting she was experimenting, but thinking that the experiment may have been somewhat successful, they still seem that even that conversation still seems a bit on the awkward side. So I'm not counting a development in that relationship yet. Other things that I kind of canceled out, of course, were Izzy and Alex started the episode really good, ended basically back to square one, but that would cancel out, so I just didn't put it on the list. But ultimately, that does still leave us with 14 points, and so it is a 10 out of 10 on our mostly objective ranking. It is the first episode of season 5, and so Dream a Little Dream of Me is in first place. Personal ranking for this episode, I ultimately decided to give it an 8. A lot of things happened in this episode, and the storyline was focused on a specific set of patients, which are things that I typically like within the series. But also a lot of the stories revolved around something that I personally don't enjoy, which is infidelity. There were, again, questionable medical decisions, which rubbed me the wrong way, and we haven't really seen decisions like this really being a thing in the last couple seasons. That was more like season 1, where it went really heavy with that, and a little bit in season 2. So questionable decisions are back, and I did take points for that because obviously it does rub me the wrong way. But we did get to meet Owen, who is a series regular, going for, well, I think it's going forward. He did decline Richard's job in this episode, but I don't think it's too long before he's back. Maybe a couple episodes. I don't know for certain. I can't remember those small details. But anyways, we got to meet another who will soon become a series regular, trauma surgeon. And it did feel like, in a way, it's setting up because, again, the protocols are changing. Richard had a speech at the end. And, the hospital as a whole had some events happening to the hospital. But overall, I found it an entertaining episode. There just were some things that I didn't like. That's why I felt that 8 was fair, because overall it was very good, very entertaining, just not worth higher than that, in my opinion. Bringing me to personal ranking, Dream a Little Dream of Me, currently in first place, because it is the only episode so far. And that now brings us to our series ranking so far. Mostly objective ranking. Objectively seems to be getting worse season by season because season 1 was in first, followed by season 2, 3, then 4. Season 5 so far, though, is starting strong with a 10 out of a possible 230. On the personal ranking side, season 3 was in first place, followed by season 2, then season 4. Season 1 is currently in fourth place, and season 5 has an 8 out of 230 so far. With that, we have rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 5, Episode 1, Dream a Little Dream of Me. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.